Now, for those of you who've been in the church building all morning and are feeling cold, I have no sympathy, because I've been in the marquee and it's colder. Andy is going to lead us in some aerobics to try and get the blood down. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And if you're interested, your lunch came from All Things Nice, the deli in Causton, so we've shopped local. Do go and support them. Now, lots of you are here because you have a situation where you're managing a building that perhaps doesn't work for you in the way that you want it to. Maybe it's leaking, maybe there are bits falling off, maybe it's just not providing the things that you need for modern life and for modern groups. And so one of the things we anticipated you would have as you came today would be questions about how to transform a church building from where it is now to where you want it to be in the future. Now, a few years ago, our lovely DAC people at the diocese arranged for a day in diocesan offices for fabric officers and incumbents to come and hear our next speaker talk. And I went with two of my fabric officers, and it was a great, great occasion. We learned so much, and we came away with inspiration, and partly that inspiration is what drove us to get on with this project here in Haveringland. So when we were looking for keynote speakers for today's conference, we thought we would go straight to Nigel and see if he was available to come and speak to us. Nigel is an architect based in the Cambridge area and working, is it exclusively with churches? Or mostly with churches and historic buildings. Nigel is also connected to the National Churches Trust.
Yep.
As a trustee.
Yep, that's correct.
Anything else that we need to know about?
I'll give a brief
framing
comment.
Excellent. Yeah. So we're so pleased that Nigel's agreed to come to us and to speak to us. And I look forward to what he has to say. And again, at the end of Nigel's talk, there'll be an opportunity for brief questions and some answers, hopefully. So would you please welcome Nigel Walter.
Thank you very much. Many are cold, but few are frozen, I think is the text for today. Just before, I have about 20 slides, which unfortunately you've got in front of you. Normally, normally that doesn't happen, but anyway, never mind. Just before I get into that, I just wanted to give you some framing comments as to where this is coming from. So just very brief sort of introduction. So yes, I'm a conservation architect. I basically have three sort of areas of life that are in a very pleasant and actually privileged balance, and they mutually inform one another. I'm a conservation architect and I run a practice near Cambridge. Second is that I do some academic work, including internationally with colleagues from different countries. And thirdly, I do various voluntary roles, both inside the church. I'm a licensed lay minister, and with sort of various committees like the Church Buildings Council. I help to chair a DAC, and I'm a trustee of the National Churches Trust, which is a wonderful organisation. I'll touch on that one aspect of the work that we do in a little bit. There was lots in what's been said before, and particularly in Bishop Jane's talk, that we could pick up on. I think the biggest theme that I see running through this is people. And I see, again, I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail, that you can't look at a building like this or, grade 1 listed, medieval wonder in isolation. You cannot treat it as a work of art and do justice to it. The heritage does not lie only in the physical fabric. The heritage, to me, lies in the joining together of people and place. people and the physical fabric. And anything that anybody does that weakens that link is destroying heritage. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of conservation process, it doesn't mean to, but it actually has the effect of doing that. It makes it too difficult. And if it's difficult to change your building, then that's a weakening of it's a weakening of the investment of the community in the building often. So I'm coming from a point of view where I see a building like this as a living thing, and living things, as we know, change. To live is to change, said John Henry Newman. It's a great quote because he goes on to say, not only to live is to change, which is an acknowledgement that change is on the agenda, but to be perfect is to have changed often. So that's sort of turning things around such that change is the natural state of things. And indeed, I would say that a deeply historic building that has changed, everybody should rejoice at that because it shows that it's alive. And it's only the living buildings, the used buildings, that are going to survive. So even if you're not interested in the church, which I am, even if you're not, you should be celebrating change and life because then these things will endure. Now, we're, I imagine, all familiar with the nursery rhyme, here is the church. Join in when you know the words. Here is the church. Here is the steeple. Open the doors and... Question is, where are the people? Where are the people? That's a question that follows me and I use in different ways in different contexts. In a conservation context, I would use it to say, we as a process are not accounting for the people properly. Where are the people in the process? In a rural situation, or indeed in many other situations, there's a deep anxiety in the church as to where are the people, where's the next generation? There's also a... So that you can see, in that context, you can see the where are the people as a sort of negative thing, or a threat, potential threat, a sort of gloom on the horizon, if you like. But there's also, one can turn it around and think, where are the people of our parish, of our community? Where, physically, where are they? They're in that house over there and that house over there, and maybe they're down the pub, so maybe we should be down the pub. If the pub still exists. But also, sort of, in more of a sort of cultural sense, where are the people in their lives? Are they happy? Are they hurting? Where are they hurting? Because that then brings us back to the service that we can be offering to our communities. So, where are the people? We've had this in kind of each of the bits that have happened so far today, and I imagine we'll carry on. Where are the people as a theme? Okay, I have a clicker, so let's click on. An agenda for today. Relations. I've touched on that already. To me, buildings are fundamentally relational. That's the people and place bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about principles, a little bit about the permissions process and how that looks from the point of view that I've been sketching out, bits about community, and there'll be some examples, about 4 examples. Just to warn you, not all of the examples are rural. 2 of them are, 2 of them aren't. Each situation is different, as we know, but they're each there for a reason. So, let's move on. First example, Great Wilbraham is a village to the east of Cambridge, close enough to Cambridge to be a sort of commuter-type village. About 600 people, perhaps. Medieval church, interesting history, used to have a tower in the middle, the tower moved to the end at various stages. So, classic sort of thing of a building that has grown over time. This is not the focus of this talk, but just as a sort of mental model, I always find a metaphor that can go a long way. I find it very helpful to think of historic buildings as narratives, ongoing narratives. A narrative is a means of explaining about change over time, which is what a historic building is. Generally speaking, certainly our churches, almost all of them have changed multiple times through their history. So why do we treat them as things that shouldn't change anymore? Change is in their nature, right? So narrative captures that. Narrative is, and the church is intergenerational. And since we go back, that's, as Bishop Jane was talking about, the communion of saints. We are part of a community that goes back many generations, and it's a sort of active community, including the dead people. That's, why we're comfortable with churchyards around our churches. So intergenerational, going into the past, communal, and ongoing. So we need to leave space for future generations to continue the narrative. And hopefully, in our generation, if it falls to us to change our building, then we will be creative in our generation. Because there's no point in writing a chapter to your book if you're not going to be creative. You don't want a dud chapter in the middle. You want to be creative, with each chapter driving the plot forward. Okay, so typical medieval building. In this particular case, again, as with many, no toilet, no kitchen. Somebody left about 50 grand, very nice, in a bequest to the church to put in a toilet. Terrible delays, and they couldn't work out how on earth to do it, a good agreement, etc. What we ended up with, so this is before the event. This is ticky-tacky late Victorian. What started out as a vestry ended up as a kitchen, really not very good. Pews, nothing to write home about. 16th century, possibly even 15th century screen, but not original to the building, but you can't just throw it away. We ended up putting accessible toilet, kitchen, and a lobby so that the toilet is lobbied, stairs up to the ringing chamber or a ringing gallery because you needed to put the bell ringers up because they obviously couldn't be on the same floor anymore. Modern materials, a bit like, very much like what we've got at the back here that speaks of its age, and more people. People. And one of the nice things that has happened with this project is that the bell ringing, not that they're actually ringing bells there, but the bell ringing becomes something that is connected to the life of the church, as opposed to being sort of high up in the tower and behind stuff where you can't see it, which is great for the bell ringers, and indeed there's space now to stand to the side and learn, but there's a much more sort of meaningful connection with the life of the church. Okay. This is a little bit about the, I'm not going to labour this, but about the administrative framework within which our permission system, the faculty system, exists. And that overall permissions framework is called the ecclesiastical exemption. And it was last revised in 2010, and there's a very helpful guidance document that's sat alongside the actual legislation. And within that guidance document, there's this quote: the ecclesiastical exemption reduces burdens on the planning system while maintaining an appropriate level of protection. That's basically to say, if we didn't have the ecclesiastical exemption, the planning system could not possibly cope, right? So that's an upfront acknowledgement from government, that's great. And reflecting the particular need of listed buildings in use as places of worship, to be able to adapt to changing needs over time to ensure their survival in their intended use. There's lots in that, but the key takeaway is that churches are living buildings, okay, that thing again, whose ability to change is essential to their survival. And that's in the legislation that everybody is covered by in dealing with this. So it's just useful to have these sort of little markers which stake out the territory in which one enters once one tries to sort of change things. In bolder terms, use it or lose it. It's only used buildings that in the long term will survive. So forget the religious bit, which I'm very committed to. Just on the heritage bit, we've got to use these buildings, and use means change. So let's get on with it. Church of England, obviously our manifestation of this overall, under this umbrella, is the faculty system. And that's governed by a measure, the 2018 measure, which is like an act of parliament for the church, which has this sort of headline bit at the beginning about a duty to have regard to a church's purpose. Anyone carrying out functions of care and conservation under this measure must have due regard to the role of the church as a local centre of worship and mission. So again, it's not just however wonderfully art historical the thing is, it's what we use the building for as a local centre of worship and mission. It's really important. And the conservation landscape is full of experts. We've got 6 amenity societies who have the right to comment on stuff. We've got Historic England, Church Buildings Council, which I sit on, local authority may weigh in, all sorts of, it's crawling with experts. And the one form of expertise that is not acknowledged within the system officially, but I would say is probably the most important, is your expertise. Your expertise in knowing your patch better than anybody else does. Or at least you should. It's a big question. Do you really know your patch? Because if you don't, you know, should you really be, you know, are you church? I would say that the church, in every case, should be the body that knows its place best, and better than the local authority, certainly better than the experts that come in, you know, to opine and go away again. And I think part of the joy of... Ooh, what's happened? Nigel. If I change that? Oh, yeah, I just have to fiddle about. Okay. I think there's something very hopeful about... Bishop Jane talked about reimagining churches. There's a reimagining of a church as in reordering it, let's say. That's one form of reimagining. The more, the sort of prior and the more essential form of reimagining is imagining what a church is good for, both amongst the people who attend the church and the rest of the community. So there are lots of people in our communities who will not go in, I mean, there are a few who will not go in to a church as a matter of principle. There are a whole lot more who will just pass by it because in their minds, over the door is written, private members religious club, only come in if you belong here. And that's not me, so I don't come in. So there's a reimagination that needs to take place. And so holding activities like a concert or a beer festival. A few churches do beer festivals. You can make a strong argument that that's a continuation of the parish ale from medieval times, which was a primary means of churches raising money to keep the roof on. Yeah? I mean, nothing has changed, really. These buildings need maintenance, and there needs to be a financial model that sustains that. But if people are able to cross the threshold for something that they know they want, then you might begin to have conversations about stuff they didn't know they wanted, but actually really are thirsting for. It might start in terms of a sense of rootedness, but you know, there's a whole load of... the spiritual good that a church can offer, and hopefully as a community that it models, is something that everybody needs. That's at least, that's where, that's how I see it. So, we shouldn't be shy of talking about our expertise in community. That's the bottom line with that one. Okay, so this is about where the heritage lies. And to me, as I alluded to before, it's not just in the physical stuff, nor is it. Some people in heritage would argue it's just in the people, and the sort of physical stuff is incidental. I wouldn't go to that extreme. I think that is also mistaken. And so instead I see it as a nexus, a binding together, or an amalgam, if you like. It's like, you know, scrambled eggs. Once you've made scrambled eggs, you can't separate out the egg from the yolk, right? It's that, you know, heritage is making scrambled eggs. Yeah? You have, your building and your people are intertwined in a way that shouldn't be, you shouldn't try to peel those apart. So heritage is a binding together of people and place. That's the key thing with that. I like also to think of it as dance partners. You're in a dance together, and to dance well, you need to have a pretty high degree of intimacy, right? So holding back from your building, you know, not bothering to check that the gutters are clear, or you know, whatever it might be, holding back from the building, you're likely, well, you suffer and the building suffers. You suffer together. If you hold back from the dance, you're likely to fall over. Right? So let's not fall over. Let's engage properly with the dance. That's the plea. Okay. And sorry, yes, just a nice quote. You may be familiar with it. Churchill, different context, it has to be said, but said this great thing: we shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. So that's getting at that mutuality. The building is not just a tool or a tent over an activity. Think of it in more positive terms. Give it a personality. Swear at it if you like. Argue with it, but engage with it. Don't be that sort of grumpy couple who've long since ceased talking to one another, just sort of facing away from each other. Okay. Second example. A medieval church, but clearly in a different situation. This is the large Grade 1 listed medieval parish church in Ely. And this is the way it was before a reordering. So fully pewed by the Victorians, as many of our churches were. And a building that was used half a day a week at most. What you don't see in this, that on the south side were built a couple of halls in succession in the 20th century. So that's where all the sort of community activity took place, and the church just used for services. And the church, as in people, were chafing against the church as in building, because it didn't really sort of match the style of worship. Through quite a long process, all changed, all the pews taken out, bar 2 or 3 retained, underfloor heating, new stone floor, various other changes, air source heat pumps in that case. We can talk about, not in this, but if you have questions about sustainability and heating, etc., we can have a bit of a discussion about that. But this building has gone from a building used half a day a week at most to one that's used 7 days a week. It's quite difficult to book it or even get into it sometimes. In the long term, it's only the used buildings that survive. So this church now has a much better prospect than it did as a result of the change that we've done. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about another way of looking at churches, and I call this church anatomy. And it's based on an advertising idea. So I don't know whether anybody's a marketeer. There was an American marketeer called St. Elmo Lewis, I think, in the early 1900s. And he came up with this idea that any print advert, pretty much, could be resolved into 4 key elements. And the mnemonic for that is AIDA. So the first is that you have a headline that draws attention, you have an image that provokes interest, you have some text, some copy that provokes desire, and there's a call to action, so AIDA. And basically any good advert, print advert, will resolve into those elements pretty much. I think that churches share some of that, and I think that we can look at churches in 4 similar categories. So the first is that churches need to draw attention to themselves. So they need something to grab attention. We can call that the sort of wow bit. It's no accident that churches often have a tall tower, often a spire. They are often built on a sort of a rise in the land or in an urban setting on a street corner, so that they draw attention. They're not hidden away. Second is that they need to welcome people in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So there's a hospitality function. Third, there's well-being. So by that I mean the sorts of activities that happen in churches that aren't explicitly religious. So it might be Boys Brigade, it might be mums and toddlers, it might be coffee mornings. A lot of the things that are programmed for this building would fall into that category. And then there's worship. So 4 W's: wow, welcome, well-being, and worship. And I think that you can analyse any building into those 4 things, and they will be in different disposition. There was a Victorian move. Again, we've talked about the village halls. There was a Victorian move where you would often have, particularly buildings built at that time, you'd have the church worship bit and the well-being bit, the kind of community activity, in separate buildings side by side, which was a particular sort of theological proposition which I think has proved unhelpful, frankly. And some of our building projects are where you've got that side-by-side arrangement are trying to sort of draw those 2 things together by linking them in the middle. This is what I think you could think of as a typical medieval/rural church. Does a good job of drawing attention to itself. The welcome bit is tiny because it didn't need to be any more than that, because people understood that they needed to go into church for different things. But church wasn't foreign to them in the way that it is now to many people. And then the two forms of community, the well-being and the worship, are superimposed in the same space. So we've heard mention of this before. Different things happened in a church building that we would, and certainly the Victorians would, raise their eyebrows at and wanted to sort of expel those from church buildings. That to me is quite a healthy model in many ways for the contemporary age, certainly that second aspect. This is clearly not a rural church building. This is on Mill Road in Cambridge, a church called St Philip's, and it had various bits of change done to it, which sort of looks rather sort of latrine-like, or I'm not sure, bus stop or something, sort of onto the street. They were trying to do a welcome and a kitchen on the side. This particular project, the church was gutted and a new front put on it with a cafe. Not appropriate in every situation, but in this situation, which is quite urban, dense, there's definitely space for another cafe, because, and that's a great sort of threshold activity, because people understand coffee in a way that they no longer understand God. They get the smell of coffee, they don't get the smell of God anymore. God doesn't smell good anymore in the society, so we need other ways of encouraging people across the threshold. This is a cutaway view of the, and it was doing this building, which was about 15 to 20 years ago, that got us thinking about this church anatomy bit. So this particular building resolves into a number of zones, which I'll talk about in a sec. But the key thing is that success looks like people. Again, that's the relationality bit about it. Both that people relate better between one another in the church, but also that the church relates better to those outside, and therefore there's less of a threshold to draw people in. So it's making your boundaries fuzzier, so that it's more comfortable to sort of take an initial little step on, just peek around the corner, and gradually, because that's the way. Contrary to Saul on the road to Damascus, he's a bit of a one-off. Most people come to faith through stages and in the context of relationships. So we need buildings that permit at least a bit of that sort of coming in by stages for things that aren't religiously, organised, perhaps. You then have the conversations that transform people's lives. So the different stages that the building. Don't think of your project, if you've got a project, as a building project. It's not primarily a building project. It's a mission project or a ministry project that may or may not involve a building. Sometimes you might start down the road of a building project and actually realise that it isn't a building. You're not going to do a building project. You've got other things that you need to do first or instead. Even if you do have a building project, hold on to that sort of that framing in your vision, because if you don't have a really strong vision, we've already heard about how difficult these projects can be. The cost of doing a project to the life of a church can be really quite high in terms of time, money, but time, energy. It sucks the energy out of other things. So it's only really if you can build a sort of pretty broad consensus on the basis of a shared vision that you'll have the fuel to get through that process. It's well worth doing it, but not to be done lightly. So that's the sort of vision bit. The building resolves into a series of stages, this idea of phased engagement. So you've got a public realm out here, you've got a sort of welcome bit. In this particular case, there were two sliding folding doors that created a meeting space for about 25 people, labelled the sort of well-being bit, and then the worship bit. It's not as neat and tidy as that. The bits flow between. They screen World Cup football, for example, in the church. So there's more flow, but it sort of resolved into those. And this is what it looks like as a diagram. So you get that internal flow in this case. You also, in this case, get a nice permeable frontage, so you can see in. Now there are loads of situations where that's not going to be possible, but there are other ways of signalling that you are open for business and that you can draw people in. Just things like paths, perhaps lighting, different things. Okay, let's move on. Now, the putting of community uses into church buildings is something that we're quite good at in Britain. If you go to the continent, there's far less of it. And when people talk about changing the layout of a church, they generally mean that it's a closed church and you're doing some kind of adaptive reuse. We've taken a different path in this country, and it's really helpful that we have. I think it's a very healthy thing. And so that's why we get toilets and kitchenettes and some reordering, clearing of pews, and these community activities coming back in. And a lot of it is, I think, is pinned to this book by J.G. Davis, who is a theologian based in Birmingham, and here's a bit from the preface of his book. Most books about the architecture of churches pay little attention to what went on inside them, and insofar as they do, they confine themselves entirely to matters liturgical. But that's only one facet of the complete picture. For over a millennium and a half, churches were the scene of a host of varied secular activities. To ignore them is to pass over an essential element in understanding them functionally. Moreover, the way churches were and are used implies a certain concept of the relationship between the sacred and the secular. So what he's pointing to is that our church buildings actually reveal quite a profound theological understanding of what it is to be human, I suppose. Some people would say that J.G. Davis sort of overstated his case, but I think it is a pretty good case. And even if he did, I don't think he did, but even if he did, this is a key step in the path to which ends up with toilets and kitchenettes in churches. So it's quite useful to sort of understand where that comes from. And then if you go back to what the medieval and rural church typically looks like, he's talking here, the blend of the sacred and the secular, in the overlaying of these two forms of community, that they're happening in the same space. I want to go on and just talk briefly about the National Churches Trust and this piece of research, which some of you may have come across, the House of Good. So the House of Good was first done in 2020, updated in 2021, and it aims to get at this. What is the economic and social value of church buildings to the UK? Now, how on earth, you might ask, do you try and assess that? Well, there is actually a government methodology for assessing the value of things that aren't really figured in financial terms. For example, as government, you want to know, do we get more benefit out of building a brand spanking new centralised hospital or investing in primary health care across a broader area? And the methodology for doing that is called the Green Book. It's a Treasury document, the Green Book. And the NCT took that methodology and applied it to the data that they had about churches and the activities that churches were doing. So the answer to that question, but maybe we should have a guess. Let's do an auction. Who would suggest that the economic and social value of church buildings in the UK amounts to £1 billion a year? Does that sound credible? $1 billion? Yes? $1 billion? Do I hear 2 billion? 5 billion? 5 billion, thank you, 5 billion. Any more? Any other bids? Are we stuck at 5 billion? 10 billion, thank you. 10 billion, 10 billion, 10 billion. Am I? Sorry? 20 billion. Now we're talking. Going once, going twice, 20 billion. Any advance on 20 billion? Shall I tell you how much it is? It's £55 billion a year. Isn't that extra? And that's probably a conservative estimate. Firstly, it's 2019 prices. Secondly, they're only looking at actually a fairly restricted range of activities. So it covers quite a different types of activity. So heritage is good for you. There's a health benefit in heritage. Worship is good for you. So it actually is good for you individually, and therefore you take strain off the NHS, etc., and social services by going to church. So congratulations, those of you who go to church. The really big values in that, however, are the social action that the church does. And that's where they looked at 4 activities only: youth groups, drug and alcohol support, mental health and counselling, and biggest of all, food banks. Food banks actually form about 70% of that total, just food banks. So £1.4 million is an average across the 38,500 churches that there are in the UK. So if you're running a food bank, you're quite likely getting up towards that sort of value, even if you're quite a small church. Some churches are sort of way above. So I think this is a really interesting piece of research, and partly what it does, I think, is precisely this thing of changing the spell of God, because it's talking about the stuff that churches do, or one aspect of the stuff that churches do, in a way that government, both central and local, can understand. And I think that's a very powerful thing. The Trust has produced, after this, just in the last year, has launched a web tool so that any church can go and input your activity. It asks for your annual turnover and 10 attendance figures. And out of it, you get a bespoke value for the activity of your church. So I would thoroughly encourage you to go. You can get to it through. So this is houseofgood.nationalchurchestrust.org. I would urge you to do that. And then one last example. This is a rural example, a place called Southo, which is just to the west of the A1, a bit south of Huntingdon in Ely Diocese, Grade 1 listed, a village of about 400 people, something like that, so not dissimilar to here. And they also had have a community hub project. So the story in this place is church with kind of half a dozen people, basically, a village hall, but a tiny village hall, which couldn't really fit any people. So the church was the prime venue in terms of a meeting of decent size. And over a period of time, the church began to cooperate with people within the community and the parish council. And it got to the stage where they had decided that they would dispose of the village hall and that they would put all their effort into the church to create a community building. So that's, if you like, an undoing of the village hall problem. Yes? Because the village hall problem is a problem as far as the church is concerned, because essentially what we've done is we've given up our role as prime venue to another building that has come along later, which is more comfortable, and which people sort of tend to go to. And it's because our building looks like we're not welcoming people. So that's where the reimagination needs to come in. And so this is a particular case where sometimes, and in fact there's another case, a place called Woodhurst, also in Ely Diocese, where there is a village hall, but it's a prefab, and it's a pretty rubbish building. It's got a limited life. And again, there's some very brave people are earlier in the process trying to turn the church into a village hub, and Sam's well aware of this project, as is Geoffrey, this idea. And what's interesting, in both of these cases, Southo and Woodhurst, again, it comes back to where are the people. In the case of Woodhurst, this is just, I did a quinquennial inspection a few weeks ago and met the treasurer, who was very keen on this project. Now, the treasurer was very quick to say, I am not a worshipper. She's not a church person at all, and yet she's now on the PCC, and she's the treasurer of the PCC, and is providing the energy behind this. And actually so the church has managed to encourage her into, give her a generous welcome, and she is wanting to, she sees the relevance of the church building in a way that probably still most people within that community don't. But she's the, sort of magic weapon, really, because she can say, I'm not a worshipper, but this is for all of us. Isn't that great? And something very similar happened here. A lady called Angie, who was also parish council related, not church related, who absolutely got into this. That's the plan of the church. These nice archaeological plans that show you got some 12th century stuff, etc. The tower, interestingly, is sort of attached on the side to the shorter north aisle. This was the rather delightful logo that some children produced for it. I particularly like the cow peeking over the battlements. Isn't that great? The community hub. These are the elements. In fact, this is an older plan, so some of the things have changed. So putting 2 toilets into the base of the tower, a staircase so that the ringers can still ring, a kitchen. That kitchen is now gone for various reasons. Air source heat pump outside for underfloor heating. This project fell foul of the withdrawal of the VAT scheme. So suddenly there was a huge shortfall. And so there was a lot of sort of cost trimming. So the outcome is slightly different. The chief bit that people will be aware of, well, 2 things. They've gone for overhead radiant heating, which is a good solution for a building that's not used all the time. And the kitchen will be condensed into something much more like we've got at the back here. So yes, so that's some sustainability stuff as well. Photovoltaic panels on a couple of roofs, and at the time, though, we're not using the permission that we've got to put the air source heat pump in. And that's from a few weeks ago. Work ongoing. They will be finishing in a couple of months, I think. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Nigel, thank you. My watch says we have a couple of minutes, so perhaps 1 or 2 questions, if there are any from the floor, and I'll go and find the microphone.
Thank you. Yes, at the back here.
Okay. Just to make sure it's on.
I just want to tell whether the idea of bringing all of this into the actual main body of the church is always the right idea, where you've got very, very ancient historic churches. There's some of the great examples you've shown in Cambridge are Cambridge churches where there's less preciousness. And in Norfolk, a lot of the tourism up here is very much sort of predicated on actually the deep history of some of the churches. I've worked with a church at Brick Rider where we put some of these facilities outside in the churchyard, and with the kind of rise of temporary buildings, which a lot of people are very attracted to, is that not a good option for some rural locations?
So I wouldn't say it always has to be inside. I wouldn't be saying that. Of the examples that were shown, the first one was grade 2 star, one was unlisted, 2 of them are grade 1. Personally, I have no hesitation in doing new stuff in old places. No hesitation at all, provided it's done really well. There are other examples I could show you, also of grade 1 listed buildings. Clearly, not everybody likes it, but that again to me is about the reimagination. The fact that we are continuing a tradition. It's an understanding of what tradition is. It's tradition as opposed to traditionalism, I think. That's a very important distinction. Traditionalism is about keeping things the same. Tradition is about a living argument, an ongoing argument about what's good. And certainly the church can be drawn to traditionalism, just the form for its own sake. But I think a healthy church and a healthy heritage environment allows for change. What that change looks like is what is precisely up for grabs. But thank you. And just the other, the temporary buildings. I'm designing for 100 and 200 and more years. The temporary buildings are not going to survive.
Yeah. Oh, go on. Sorry.
Can you start again?
I'd actually feel embarrassed about going into the room in charge because I don't really want, I'd rather go out to go to the loo. Maybe a female problem.
So there's something very specific. So again, some people, partly it's getting used to it, but I would say, and this is not a criticism of the scheme that's been done here because I think it's probably the only option, but that's not a great place for the toilet. You want to put the toilet as far west as you can, precisely so that you can use it without saying, I need the toilet. Yeah? But, I mean, so that might be, it's not my sensitivity, and respect your sensitivity. For people coming in, they don't understand why there's not, from the outside for a wedding, whatever, they don't understand why there's not a toilet in the building. Why do I have to go to the shed? Yeah? Don't know. But it's different solutions in different places is the answer.
I'm afraid, in order to keep roughly on time, we're going to have to stop there. But Nigel, on everybody's behalf, thank you very much. Fascinating talk.
Thank you.